The problems of educational funding have prompted some meetings between Governor Fob James and education officials. The presidents of two-year colleges and technical schools, along with State School Superintendent Dr. Wayne Teague, met with the governor about his planned 10% cut for higher education. After the meeting, Dr. Teague indicated support from the two-year college presidents for the governor's plan.
They, of course, were concerned about having to take a cut in their budget for next year, and that's I think it's understandable. But they agreed that in order for the governor to do some things he wishes to do in education, it would be necessary. They pledged their support. What the governor wishes to do is to improve the literacy of the state. And his feelings, and I share these, that to improve the literacy, you must do something about it early, from kindergarten through the 6th grade.
Governor James and others are concerned about the current proration of the Special Education Trust Fund. The chairman of the House Education Committee, Representative Pete Turnham of Auburn, announced a plan to combat proration.
I have in my hand here a list that has just been handed to me from the Revenue Department showing 68 items that are now exempt from the state sales tax, amounting to $285,756,000. Now, I believe we as a legislature can find $60 million here to alleviate this proration of $60 million that we're in and bring the education dollars back up to the level that they were, put a good taste in everybody's mouth, and go ahead and set our budget for next year without having to cut anybody a dime.
Both Teague and Turnham are talking about positive moves in the educational funding problem, but they disagree on a major point: the governor's proposed 10% cutback for higher education. Turnham says higher education is moving forward, and a funding cut at this time is not a good idea. Teague indicates support for the cut, but he must remember Turnham's House Committee will debate the measure when the legislature convenes next month. Paul Roth, WSFA TV News.
A slew of agencies and committees told members of the state's Joint Budget Committee what they wanted in the way of state financing for the fiscal year that is coming up. The committee asking for the most in today's testimony was the State Historical Commission. Spokesman Milo Howard told the committee members that his commission needed a budget of some $2.69 million, of which about $1 million would be federal funding and grants. Howard was questioned about a State Department of Public Accounts audit on their records and a meeting on that matter 2 weeks ago, which never came off.
As I understood the answer that he gave, exit conferences were confidential, and they did not care to conduct their exit conference with the press present, and that's the reason they didn't hold it.
In all, some 30 various commissions and agencies delivered their budget proposals to the Joint Senate and House Committee. Tomorrow, it's the big guns. Proposals for budgets from the offices of State Treasurer, State Auditor, Secretary of State, and Attorney General will be made. Many of the committee members say that the proposals delivered today showed signs of conservatism. The concern is whether or not that trend will continue at tomorrow's hearings. At the Capitol, Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News.
Attorney General Charles Graddick came before the committee proposing a $2.2 million appropriation for next year. The current budget is $1.6 million. In making his presentation, Graddick said the Office of Attorney General has incurred extra cost in its operation.
We have to provide not only adequate representation, but the best representation. Now, I don't mind telling you that the majority of these lawsuits filed by these prisoners are frivolous. But because of federal procedure, we have to spend a great deal of time taking depositions, affidavits. We have public hearings in court, and they're just not summarily dismissed on summary judgment.
Graddick also questioned the rationale of some state agencies being represented in legal matters by Special Assistant Attorneys General rather than his office. He said the money would be better spent by the Attorney General's office. State Auditor Betty Frink made her appeal for funds next. She requested over $800,000, almost double her current budget of $479,000. Secretary of State Don Siegelman asked for almost $400,000, about $70,000 more than the current appropriation. The request from State Treasurer Annie Laurie Gunter was actually smaller than the current appropriation. Mrs. Gunter said at the urgings of Governor James, she trimmed her request to $729,000, or $1,000 less than the current budget. The head of the retirement systems, Dr. David Bronner, told the committee $200 million will be needed to pay pension benefits next year. Bronner, who is also the state finance director, urged lawmakers to consider the creation of a joint legislative committee to study state retirement systems as a whole.
The Joint Interim Budget Committee has heard presentations from some major departments of government. Some budget requests have been more conservative than others. Nonetheless, the members of the committee have questioned in detail just what the departments plan to do with their money. Dennis Latham, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
The just balance in the budget is not going to solve the inflation problem. In the first place, it didn't create it. So it's not the total answer to solving it. There are probably about 50 reasons why we've got an inflationary spiral in this country.
Senator Donald Stewart says the nation's problems are complex, and there are no easy answers to solving them. The freshman U.S. Senator was in Troy hosting a town meeting at the Pike County Courthouse, but the turnout was small. Less than 50 persons attended the meeting, pressing Stewart for answers to problems ranging from a federally balanced budget to money for education. Educational funding is a hot topic in Pike County since schools were nearly closed by a lack of money earlier this week. Superintendent-elect John Key asked why federal monies earmarked for education are not put to their best use. Stewart replied he and others are working to change the situation, but change takes time. In closing, he warned Alabamians of being unrealistic if they expect the government to solve the nation's problems without help from the public. Paul Roth, WSFA TV News, Troy. The plane was empty when it landed. All 8 tons of marijuana on board yesterday morning were burned later in the day at a landfill between Eufaula and Clayton. A spokesman for the Alabama Bureau of Investigation says a total of 12 persons are now in the Barber County Jail on drug-related charges. On Monday, they'll be transported to Montgomery for arraignment before a U.S. magistrate. The spokesman noted the investigation into the pot flight is continuing, with the possibility of several more arrests. Judging by the cargo on the confiscated plane, officials speculate it had probably made several stops in Florida and was probably headed north for other stops in Alabama. The plane, worth an estimated $100,000, will be stored here at Danley Field to be used as part of the evidence against those arrested. Paul Roth, WSFA TV News.
Bronner himself requested the Ethics Commission decision on his dual status. 2 attorneys representing Bronner appeared before the commission to present their view, after research of the law, that Bronner's 2 jobs were not conflicting and, in fact, were complementary. John Papanastas told the commission they were firmly convinced of the legality of Bronner's positions.
We simply convinced that his performing both of these jobs is both lawful, as the Attorney General's opinion has already stated, and does not violate the ethics law. We feel that the statutory schemes for both departments, as well as the overwhelming weight of precedent in the financial community, resolves any question and removes any doubt that any conflict actually exists as far as the Secretary-Treasurer also serving on the Retirement Board. In fact, we believe that it's evident the duties of both these departments are complementary and that the legislature intended that they complement each other.
The commissioners tossed the subject back and forth, trying to decide if they even wanted to issue an opinion. Executive Director Melvin Cooper suggested that they could issue no opinion if they desired. Finally, the commission approved an opinion which said there would be no conflict of interest as long as Bronner refrained from voting on matters involving his job or salary as a member of the Retirement Systems Board. Bronner's reaction to the decision was naturally one of delight.
It's one of the 2 or 3 hurdles that I sort of set up for myself to get through. One was the Attorney General's office to make sure it was, in our estimation, totally legal. And the second hurdle was to make sure that there was no ethical problems whatsoever. Being that probably one more hurdle, and that is to meet with both boards.
Dr. Bronner mentioned overcoming hurdles in his quest to be state finance director and with the retirement systems of Alabama. The next one, he says, will be a joint meeting between the boards of control of the employees' retirement system and that of the teachers' retirement system. He didn't indicate he knew of any opposition, but Channel 12 News has learned that at least 2 members on the teachers' retirement board will be opposing his dual position. Dennis Latham, WSFA TV News.
My own plaintiff, Mr. Walter Chandler, has had sores on his body that lasted for months and months, and we only recently was able to get medical attention that took care of them. And we're saying that these radioactive gases, and they have about 130 grams total out there. In fact, about 3,000, approximately 3,000 medical needles that are used for radium sources that are leaking radon gases. Our information indicates about 30 to 50% of them are actually leaking gas. They go through windows that are open all the time out there, and these gases leak out into the environment and contaminate and threaten the employees in the area.
But I rather suspect that it would, if he could provide this service more promptly than is currently being provided, then I suspect that there would be a savings, and I would be heartily in favor of that.
And the purpose of this program is to see what we can do to make our food stamp program more convenient for recipients. Our people who receive food stamps should not have to stand in long lines. They should not have to stand in the rain and in the weather. Particularly in our rural counties, we have problems with the aged and the disabled having to travel many miles to our county offices. So basically, this program is designed so that the Department of Pensions and Security can do a better job in serving the people of Alabama.
What about the cost?
We think overall that when we have tested it, that the cost will probably be less than what we're doing now.
So you think maybe if it works out and you invoke it statewide, you will save a significant amount of money?
I think that there is a good possibility, and what we won't save in money, we'll certainly save in making it more convenient to people who are needy and who we are designed to serve.
Well, I would anticipate that any time somebody takes on additional responsibilities that they have to, they have to analyze the individual and the position to see if they're comparable or that they dovetail together. I think some of the teacher board members, I talked to some of them, and they basically said, why did I want to do it more than anything else? I think it's sort of humorous to me in a way that out of all the things that I've done for the retirement systems or have been involved in over the past years, that to do something for free, I've caught more grief than most other things that I've done for cost.
1. Sea Level, felt by many people to be the most versatile band in the South, appeared in Montgomery last night, and they left town with that reputation intact. Sea Level is a collaboration of 6 truly talented musicians. Founded by keyboardist Chuck Level, a Tuscaloosa native, and bassist Lamar Williams from the Allman Brothers Band, Sea Level shifts easily from hard blues to southern rock to progressive jazz instrumentals. Guitarists Jimmy Knowles and Davis Causey are both sizzling lead players and excellent writers. Randall Bramlett, who plays saxophone and keyboards, is the true poet of the group, calling upon his southern heritage for his lyrical ballads. Rounding out the group is their newest member, drummer Joe English, formerly with Paul McCartney and Wings. English proved he's one of the strongest percussionists around. Unfortunately, there was a disappointing turnout for last night's concert. But the 500 or so fans who did attend were treated to a look at a band that's making new inroads into Southern music and will no doubt take the rest of the country with them. Michael Jones, WSFA TV News.
Ray Russell. Ray is on, could be very active in the and you know the people of this particular community, frankly, that were placed on this project by the federal. Finally to you that I think I agree with Governor Wallace. This indicates this building here.
Montgomery police have had a busy night investigating a slew of separate shooting incidents. One of the shootings left Willie Carter, age unknown, dead at this scene. Taken into custody is Roosevelt Floyd. Floyd was arrested by police after witnesses say he allegedly shot Carter in front of the Renaissance Lounge on North Decatur Street. Police have not released any apparent motives in the slaying, which occurred at about 2 o'clock Sunday morning. Floyd, now in police custody, is said to be in his 30s. 50-year-old Johnny Robert Matthews of 329 Clayton Street in Montgomery says he was shot by 2 men early last night. Matthews says 2 black men came up behind him as he stood in front of his home and began a fight with him. He says the 2 then shot him. Matthews described both as wearing both black shirts and pants. Matthews suffered a .22 caliber pistol wound and today remains hospitalized. 2 hours later, in Montgomery's east side, Willie Jordan was shot in the face at his apartment. Police reports indicate that Jordan was apparently shot by his girlfriend, who also lives in the same apartment complex. So far, police do not indicate any arrests in this case. Jordan, who is reported to be in his 50s, was taken to the Veterans Hospital, where the wound was reported to be superficial. Jordan was shot with a .32 caliber pistol. In the only apparent non-aggressive shooting, Sammy Lee Williams pulled the trigger on his .22 caliber pistol. The bullet lodged in his knee. This incident occurred while he was loading his gun. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News.
In that role, which will be for a period of 6 months, he will work closely with the governor and Dr. Bob Lager, Wayne Teague, and where it involves post-secondary education and the 4-year institutions in the state.
More specifically, what will be his duties?
He will be monitoring programs. He will be assisting in developing a 5-year plan for post-secondary education, and will have a responsibility of informing the governor of any developments, any ways to cut costs, any ways to do what post-secondary education is supposed to do that more effectively.
When will this start?
I believe it's probably going to be next week sometimes, and it's a pretty informal arrangement, and the senator has been offered any assistance as far as office space is concerned with the governor's office, but I'm not sure that he will be permanently fixed in this office.
After 73 years of service, the Tyler Goodwin Bridge will be repaired no more. Highway Department Director Rex Rayner has decided that the cost of repairing this bridge will far exceed what it would be worth.
The bridge is north of Montgomery, spanning the Alabama River. The bridge was hit by 2 runaway barges March 4th when high waters tore them from their moorings and swept them down the Alabama River. Damage to the bridge was extensive, with a major problem being the displacement of one of the pilings. When the barge hit, it knocked the piling over about 8 inches. At the same time, a large steel support brace was torn loose from its hinges and now just dangles loose over the river. The recommendation to discontinue repairs to the bridge came from Chief Highway Maintenance Engineer Tom Kane, who inspected the bridge earlier this week. Kane recommended that it would not be worth the money or the effort to repair the bridge. The estimations for repairing the bridge run at about $250,000, and there would always be the threat of further damage to the bridge, which has been battered by weather and drivers for years. Replacing the bridge was ruled out because it would cost nearly $6 million and take almost 7 years to complete. The alternative is the interstate interchange, which will cost about $800,000 and about 2 years to complete. That idea, however, was already being worked on when the bridge was last damaged. The bridge has been closed since the March 4th collision, forcing a good many people to have to take another way home. Adding to the incentive to quit using the bridge are plans already underway to phase out that Tyler Goodwin Bridge by 1980. Traffic will be rerouted through Interstate 65 until the interchange can be built to funnel the Highway 143 traffic. The Tyler Goodwin Bridge began its life in 1906 as a turnstile bridge and cost only $35,000 to build. Rayner's decision to quit using the Tyler Goodwin Bridge brings about the latest and final chapter. In the chapter will be information detailing who will tear down the bridge, when that will take place. That chapter still has to be written. At the Tyler Goodwin Bridge, Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News.
Swindle wrote the letter to Bennett criticizing the assignment of convicted murderer and robber Thad Williams to a minimum security job at the prison system's central office. He escaped from the South Union Street office on February 8th. The 22-year-old Williams was convicted for the purse-snatching and murder of 61-year-old Lucy McCauley on Mildred Street on December 27, 1975. He was arrested on January 3, 1976, and later sentenced to life in prison plus 10 years. Swindle says he feels this is not the proper way to handle criminals.
But I just asked for an explanation as to why a prisoner that committed a senseless murder in this city was allowed to return to this city within a 10-block area of where he committed this murder and work as a minimum security prisoner and escape from that location. The real purpose for it is our detectives and policemen are running across these convicts that's walking these streets, driving these streets, and one of their early release programs, pre-release programs, or furlough programs, ever how many programs they got going, and they're permitted to come back to society before the wound of the city even heals.
Thad Williams was captured in Florida during the latter part of February and is fighting extradition to Alabama. Swindle adds that he would be glad to talk with anyone who has control over the inmates in the Montgomery area. Michael Jones, WSFA TV News.
I couldn't guarantee that would make it in the story.
I was talking about something about this rescue squad.
The county commission operates its gas allotments to the individual county departments out of two separate gas suppliers. The National Texaco supplier, which primarily fuels the sheriff department cars, announced gas rations in line with recent national petroleum problems. The commission then drew up a plan of curtailment which fell into several phases, the first of which called for a 10% cutback in gas usage by all departments. The local Texaco supplier, whose fuel is used by all other departments, announced no such cutbacks, but the commission anticipated them anyway. The commission also fears that making cutbacks in the sheriff's department and not in others would generate ill will within the county system. But the cutbacks announced in the commission's Phase 1 plan generated even more problems. The engineering department, the largest and most gas-consuming one, would be hit the hardest. They would have to operate on some 3,000 gallons of gas less per month, and over half the personnel who now take cars or trucks home would have to give them up after hours. Phase 1 would call for each department to operate on less gas each month, proportionate to consumption. To accomplish this, Phase 1 called for each department to park cars at the courthouse after hours, which normally go home with employees. Some departments claim this would cost them more, such as the tax assessor's office. That office claims that its 6 assessors work areas of the county in which they live. and having to bring the cars into the courthouse daily would necessitate an additional trip to the city at least 3 times a week, thus increasing their average fuel consumption for the month. Commissioner Nancy Cox and Clevie Johnson both rallied against the immediate implementation of Phase 1 and instead asked that each respective department head have a chance to meet the 10% cutback without the mandatory guidelines. Later, Commissioner Bill Joseph concurred. Commission Chairman McKinney, who had advocated immediate implementation of Phase 1, reluctantly followed suit, with one stipulation.
Volunteerism will only go so far, but after a 2-week time, of 2 weeks in a consecutive week that we are exceeding our fuel consumption, based on the figures that have been worked on real hard, then we're going to have to call it in for a halt. It's not going to longer be a privilege take home, it's going to be stopped.
The final motion gave each department head control over how his department met the needed gas cutbacks, and there would be a weekly check on compliance. If the 10% cutback is not met, that department would fall under Phase 1 mandatory guidelines regardless. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News.
There are about 5,000 households in Montgomery County receiving food stamps, and that number is increasing. Until the new mailing program is kicked off in May, the Montgomery County Food Stamp Office hopes their April plan will ease the long lines that form along Forest Avenue. Richard Cloud, supervisor for the Montgomery County Food Stamp Office, says the plan will space distribution of the stamps over the first 2 weeks of April. One day of the month is assigned according to the first letter in the recipient's last name. Food stamp recipients can find out which day they are scheduled for by calling the Montgomery County office.
May is the day we're really looking forward to with the mail issuance of food stamps, but we've got to live through April 1st, and that's why we're asking the cooperation of all food stamp recipients in adhering to this schedule. And this, I would say that since we do keep copies at our desk, if you have not been able to come by one of these, you can call the food stamp office and say, my name begins with a W. What is the day that you would like for me to pick up my stamps? And
officials with the Montgomery Food Stamp Office are hoping that this interim program for the month of April will prevent a repetition of the scene that took place here at the beginning of this month, when hundreds of food stamp recipients lined the sidewalks waiting for their monthly quota of stamps. Michael Jones, WSFA TV News at the Montgomery Food Stamp Office.
After hearing other cases, the court met in closed conference on Evans. It took the justices about an hour to reach a decision. After going into the conference room, the decision was announced by Chief Justice Bo Torbert.
The Supreme Court today denied the petition filed by Mr. John Carroll and Mr. Al Pennington in the Evans case. No opinion will be issued, and therefore no further comment. The vote was 8 justices in favor of denying the petition. 1 justice dissented.
1 justice dissented. It's well known that you are not in favor of the death penalty. Was that 1 dissenting opinion yours?
That dissent was by Madam Justice Shores.
Is there any other relief this court can give Carroll and Pennington, even though it does oppose the views of Mr. Evans?
Well, I could not comment on that because we have to rule on matters that are filed in the court.
None of the attorneys for John Lewis Evans have failed here in state court in a procedural challenge. Their next step could be the federal court for relief. So far, Evans hasn't asked to be saved from the electric chair. Whether or not they will go to federal court is not known at this time. This is Norman Lumpkin, WSFA TV News, the State Supreme Court.
The targets of the immunization drive are preschool children. The health department is vaccinating to prevent measles, mumps, diphtheria, whooping cough, and polio. Though officials say these diseases are not threatening the area now, they stress the importance of this proverbial ounce of prevention. The shots are free, but you'd have to pay some of these kids to come back.
It's all over now. So you got this one, man. Got this one. Ow.
Lisa Nielsen, WSFA TV News reporting.
The retirement systems of Alabama, which includes the teachers, employees, and judicial funds, invest a great deal of money. It is money from these investments which helps the various funds to meet the cost of providing benefits. Before investments are made, a committee has to approve the transaction. After that, State Treasurer Auntie Laurie Gunter releases the money. Because of the question of the dual role of Dr. David Bronner, Treasurer Auntie Laurie Gunter told TV 12 News that she wants an Attorney General's opinion about releasing the funds invested by the Employees' Retirement Fund.
For our protection, we are asking for an Attorney General's opinion as to whether or not we can release securities for the retirement systems to sell until this question is cleared up, or if, just for our own protection. And an Attorney General's opinion is advisory only, and it protects only that person to whom it's directed. So we want to have an opinion directed to the Treasurer's office to say that we can continue to sell securities and to release securities,
Because of the same Bronner question, Dr. Paul Hubbard of the AEA, who also serves on the Board of Directors of the Teachers Retirement Board and the Investment Committee, has declined to approve any more investments. He says he wants protection from financial liability, and he wants an Attorney General's opinion.
From my vantage point, it's going to require the Attorney General to tell me it's all right for me to sign those, because that would give me then the same clearance from the Attorney General's office that Dr. Bronner has. And I think not having that would always leave me in a position of being liable. And I have requested the retirement people to secure that opinion as quickly as possible, because none of us want to see monies not earn interest. But at the same time, I can't personally stand liable for any improper investment.
The questions asked of the Attorney General by State Treasurer Auntie Laurie Gunter and Dr. Paul Hubbard as his role on the Investment Committee of the Teachers Retirement Board will be solved by an Attorney General's opinion. But the circumstances that brought forth those questions, that of the dual role of Dr. David Bronner with the RSA and as State Finance Director, remains. One possible final hurdle remains this Thursday when both boards of controls of the Employees' Retirement System and the Teachers' Retirement Systems meet to discuss Bronner. Dr. Paul Hubbard says that if he doesn't propose a motion, he will at least support a motion that will give Bronner a choice of either jobs, but not both. Dennis Latham, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
The court granted stays of execution in the cases of Gilbert Franklin Beck and Jerry Wayne Jacobs. In the John Lewis Evans situation, Attorney John Carroll said there are few avenues of stays of execution available for Evans unless he wishes them.
If John wanted to appeal his case, there would be lots of avenues of appeal open to him. If he doesn't authorize an appeal in his case, then I think that there are very, very few avenues open to us. Of course, we're assessing all the options that are available and just still haven't reached a final decision as to whether or not an appeal is possible.
Have you spoken with him and asked him once again if he wants clemency or wants an appeal filed?
I've not spoken with him since last week, but people that have spoken to him recently indicate that his position is unchanged, that he still wants to be executed.
So at this point right now, what do you see as an attorney?
At this point, I think that the people of Alabama ought to prepare for what is going to happen, which is that there's going to be national attention focused on an execution that's going to occur on April the 6th. We intend to do everything legally possible to prevent it, but again, without the assistance and approval of the client, we're just unsure as to how successful we can be.
Attorney John Carroll is awaiting an audience with Governor Fob James in connection with a letter he sent the governor 10 days ago asking for a possible clemency hearing in the Evans execution case. So far, there's no indication as to when or if that meeting will ever take place. This is Norman Lumpkin, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
If you've bought a stereo album recently, you've probably noticed some defect in it. Well, don't feel alone. The multi-billion-dollar record industry is currently experiencing a major problem with their product. More and more customers are returning albums, complaining of the poor quality. Stan Charles, manager of a Montgomery record store, says the majority of the returns are for the same reason.
Probably the most common reason that people bring records back are because they're warped or scratched from the manufacturers.
The raw material for records is polyvinyl chloride, a petroleum product. And since the oil shortage, it's become more expensive and of a poorer quality. Several major record labels are trying to upgrade their products with stricter quality controls. But while the quality of the records has decreased, the quality of the stereo equipment they're played on has gotten a lot better. Stereo components are becoming increasingly sophisticated, able to pick up exactly what's on the record, music or defects. So what to do if the next album you buy looks like this when you take it out of the jacket? Record store managers agree, return it for a better copy, although you may have to make several trips. Michael Jones, WSFA TV News.
The lawmakers received a bit of encouraging news in the presentation of the budget for the governor's office. Representing the governor was his executive secretary, Dean Foy. Foy said the governor's office would need $977,400, or 10% less than the current budget. He said the office would be operating with a staff of 44. One reduction in the office was the elimination of the governor's photographer. This, said Foy, could result in a savings of $75,000 in 4 years. Foy was congratulated by Representative Walter Owens on presenting the first budget showing a 10% or larger cut. The governor's budget might have been relatively reasonable, but the next big gun took an about face.
Next, I believe, is the Public Service Commission.
The PSC came before the Budget Committee asking for a 100% increase in its allocation for next year, $4.7 million. PSC Executive Director Ralph McLemore said there could be room for cutting, but not much.
We believe that that figure can be cut between 10 and 13% and still vastly improve the accomplishment of the mission of the Public Service Commission. Make such a cut if you must, but I implore you not to go beyond that point, lest we be unable to provide the necessary protection needed and deserved by the people of Alabama.
McLemore said they needed to double the members on the staff, raise salaries, and boost travel expenses. Jerry Shoemaker, Public Safety Director, told the committee his department lacks the money it needs to do all that is expected of it. He requested $25 million, only slightly more than the current budget of $23.3 million. He said the trooper force currently totals 354, about the same as 10 years ago. Another 175 are needed, but only 40% of those could be hired out of the proposed budget, he said. The State Highway Department was next. Highway Director Dr. Rex Rayner, with Governor Fob James looking on, presented the grim facts about the funding situation the Highway Department faces. Rayner said they expect to spend $458 million next year, with anticipated revenue of only $377.7 million. This, he said, represents a deficit of over $80 million. He said his department is considering numerous funding alternatives to suggest to the legislature in order to make up the extra money. Governor James, who was present, said a wholesale tax on gasoline was one alternative. Dennis Latham, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
We feel it's too hard to manage, and so forth.
Just to stop someone who is obeying the speed limit and who is not fitting an MO of somebody who might have broken the law. We have no problem with it, but we'll continue to stop those that we think we have reason to stop, and I don't think the Supreme Court ruling affected that one bit.
I believe that this committee does not have the power to read to subpoena, but this council does,